I have two items of business for the open before we proceed with the movie review, and I need to preface the first item by saying I am aware of the schism in the audience between people who like the British royalty stuff and people who don't give a shit and wish I would just shut up about it. So in order to placate the latter group, I'm going to strive for brevity here. But there's a very annoying myth that I feel the need to dispel, and if I don't do it, it'll be like trying to stifle a sneeze. We have all seen this routine before. When there's a news story having anything to do with the British royals, and there are Americans discussing it, there is always that guy who comes along and bellows, "Why are we talking about this? Didn't we fight a revolution because we wanted to get rid of the British monarchy?" And here's your answer. No, we did not. I mean, that's a fine thing to tell to 6-year-olds when you're trying to acquaint them with the basic facts of the history of our revolutionary period, and they're too young to understand a concept like taxation without representation. But it's not a thing people ought to still be thinking after they are full-grown adults, because it is spectacularly wrong and it betrays a stultifying ignorance on the part of the idiot who's saying it. The proximate causes of the American Revolution are numerous, but none of them has anything to do with some burning desire to throw off the shackles of constitutional monarchy. Don't believe me? Then go read the minutes from the First Continental Congress. You know what you'll see? You will see a room full of men who are engaged in a veritable dick-measuring contest to see who can display the most affection for the king and the most loyalty toward the crown. No man in that room considered himself anything less than a faithful British subject who wished to remain that way. In the two missives they drafted to the attention of King George III, the language is just about as obsequious as language can be. There's a lot of "we loyal and humble subjects do faithfully beseech his majesty," and so on. If the king's government had simply acceded to the requests of the Congress in one of two ways, either by repealing the regressive taxes that were being objected to, or by granting the American colonists a couple of seats in the Parliament, we would all, in all likelihood, still be British subjects up to the present day. A lot of Americans persist in the belief that our founding fathers were engaged in some moral crusade to replace monarchy with liberal republicanism, but that belief, again, is wrong. You have to fast forward all the way to the Second Continental Congress, over a year after open war had broken out at Lexington and Concord, before Richard Henry Lee of Virginia stands up on 7 June 1776 and says, "All right, fellas, if nobody else is willing to say what we're all thinking, then I guess I will. Let's dump the damn British, and we'll start our own country." And it stands to reason why nobody else wanted to say that out loud, because not just was it a treasonable statement subject to punishment by hanging and drawing and quartering, but because a majority of the men in the room were still hoping against hope that a solution could be found that didn't require war or treason. They didn't have any objection to monarchy per se, or the British monarchy in general. They had all been born and lived their entire lives as loyal British subjects. Many of them, including George Washington, were veterans of the British Army. All they wanted was to have a bit of a say in how they were to be taxed. If Parliament had been smart, they would have just said, "Okay, we'll repeal the taxes," or "Okay, send us a couple guys and we will seat them as MPs." But they chose instead to double down, as dumb people often do in fits of hubris. And they said, "Oh, you thought those taxes were regressive? Well, wait till you see this, assholes." Moral of the story is, the desire to reject monarchy was not an animating cause of the American Revolution. Rather, it was a byproduct thereof. And now we're on to item number 2. Yesterday was the 9/11 anniversary, and if you were under any illusions about the willingness of Democrats to use literally every single thing as a political cudgel to wield against their perceived political enemies, those illusions should be well and truly shattered by now. Are today's Democrats capable of setting aside a mere 24 hours to display a bit of grace and dignity and act like we are all each other's countrymen and don't hate one another? Nope, they are not. Quite the opposite, it seems. From Joe Biden to Kamala Harris to Senator Mark Warner of Virginia to Pramila Jayapal, SpongeBob Squareface herself, and a host of others, this was their message to the nation on the 21st anniversary of the worst terrorist attack in world history. Everyone who voted for Joe Biden's opponent in the last election is morally indistinguishable from Osama bin Laden and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the 19 hijackers. And also, As if you needed more, there is a direct moral equivalence between the January 6th Capitol riot and the 9/11 attacks. So the drunk guy in the furry horn helmet farting on Nancy Pelosi's desk is exactly the same thing as hijacking a couple of 757s and using them to knock down the World Trade Center and murder nearly 3,000 people. So slow clap for you, Democrats. That is great stuff right there. That is going to play really well with the swing voters in November when you've already wrecked the economy and thrown open the border and made the last 2 years a masterclass in government incompetence. Saying that half the people in the country are cut from the same moral cloth as Muhammad Atta and Marwan al-Shehi, that is a great way of attracting voters to your cause. Very well done indeed. And now we're on to the movie review. Jim Eagle, hit the damn music. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where the best way of making new friends is to go up to a stranger and say, "Hi, you're worse than Hitler!" Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant, and the reactions to the My Son Hunter movie from the left-wing corporate fake news media have been an awful lot like the reactions to the Hunter Biden laptop itself. If you just slap the right label on it, well, that means it doesn't warrant serious rebuttal, which gets to be quite the exercise in intellectual gymnastics, for nobody disputes any longer the fact that Hunter's laptop is 100% legit, its contents are 100% legit, even the fakest of the fake news performance artists, CNN and the New York Times specifically, they have now grudgingly admitted what they knew to be true all along. The laptop is not Russian disinformation, it's not a Trump campaign dirty trick, it's not something Rudy Giuliani pulled out his ass. The fact of the matter is, the president's son, the stripper-impregnating crackhead, took that machine to a computer repair shop, signed a binding contract saying he forfeits ownership if he doesn't pick it up within 90 days, and then he promptly forgot all about it. It wound up with the FBI because the owner of the repair shop, in perusing the contents of the machine he now owned, well, he found evidence of a wide variety of fairly serious crimes, so he was then obliged by law to inform the authorities, which he did. And this is the point where some Biden supporter usually blurts out, "But the computer guy is a Trumper." Yeah? You got a point? You can't change the parameters of reality just by yelling the word Trump. I know this probably comes as a shock, but please do make a note of it. The screenplay for the My Son Hunter film is taken exclusively from the contents of the laptop, which again, nobody disputes the authenticity of the machine or of its contents. They just had to pretend otherwise until after the election was over with, because we can't have the wrong candidate winning, am I right? But strangely, the overwhelmingly negative reactions from the professional industry shill movie reviewers who occupy their own uniquely shameful corner of the fake news industrial complex seem to be predicated on that same laughably dubious logic. That you can just call something a right-wing fever dream or a MAGA fantasy, and then you can just dismiss it out of hand. But wait, let's pump the brakes. If the laptop is real and nobody says otherwise, and the screenplay is based on the laptop, how then can you dismiss the screenplay as being without any basis in reality? Spoiler alert, you can't. There are a few movies that this movie reminds me of in different ways, in terms of the way the expositional information is delivered, with lots of fourth wall breaking and on-screen graphics and such. It owes a debt to films like American Hustle and Wolf of Wall Street. In terms of the general tone of the picture and the musical choices, it reminds me of The Death of Stalin. Fantastic picture if you haven't seen it. One of the best films of the last decade as far as this reporter is concerned. In terms of the way in which serious, often fairly horrifying subject matter is treated as absurdist black humor, often accompanied by whimsical-sounding music that sort of emphasizes the effect. And it also reminds me quite a bit, especially in the first part of the first act, of Idiocracy, which is a film that sadly only grows more relevant and more prescient with each passing year. The newscast segments are what I'm thinking of here, where a reporter is interviewing people at a fiery but mostly peaceful BLM protest, where most of the protesters are empty-headed 30-year-old white women who only know how to vomit out the standard catchphrases, "We want social justice, we want equity, down with white supremacy," and so on. But here's what I find most telling about the reactions of the shill-tastic movie reviewer class, most of which fit into one of two categories, either outraged or falsely dismissive. These people simply cannot tolerate living in a world where a movie exists about a political subject that does not comport with the standard industry-approved worldview of woke leftism. I've never been so offended. This film caused me to ask difficult questions about what I believe. That's not allowed. Someone needs to put a stop to this immediately. Now, cinema is supposed to be an artistic idiom that makes leftists feel good about their leftism. It's not for dirty, filthy Trumpers. Now, it goes without saying that today's American film industry is more of an ideological echo chamber than it ever has been at any time during the 110 or so years in which it's existed. And it further goes without saying that rigid ideological conformity is the death of art in every single idiom. Remember in the Soviet Union and the Third Reich when painters and filmmakers and composers and everybody all had to work within a certain set of aesthetic constraints that was dictated from on high, from the central government, and all of the art wound up shitty and generic because of it? Well, that is exactly what Hollywood is today. Just as Soviet painters in the 1950s were required to paint in the school of socialist realism, American film directors in the third decade of the 21st century are similarly required, if they want to keep having a career and not be sent to the frickin' gulag, to produce films that comport with the tenets of the de facto state religion of orthodox wokesterism. Film critics, by and large, they don't review films anymore. You read a movie review from any corporate fake news outlet, and you don't read much about screenwriting or cinematography or any of the technical aspects of movie making that reviewers used to care about and write about. The only thing movie reviewers care about now is something called representation. If the cast is sufficiently non-white and non-heterosexual, well, then the movie is automatically good. If every actual thing about the production sucks, well, that won't be mentioned. We've seen a great object lesson in this phenomenon just recently with Amazon's god-awful piece of shit Lord of the Rings prequel. I think there are 3 episodes into that thing now. I failed to get through the first half of the first episode because it was so impossibly bad. I would have had more fun hitting myself in the face with a rock, but the critics? Well, they all say it's just great. It's got something like an 87% critic score last time I heard. And I think the user rating was in Joe Biden approval rating territory, like mid-30s and still falling like a manhole cover from 30,000 feet. Before Amazon bravely turned off the user ratings altogether and then proclaimed, because this is the standard way these things go now, that the 65% of customers who think their show sucks, well, they're obviously filthy racists, and they probably hate women too. I bet they voted for Trump. In fact, it feels more and more like all this nonsense about diversity and inclusion and representation is just a preemptive hedge for the studios and their protection squad of shiltastic douchebag reviewers to insulate themselves against valid criticism when their products suck. Now, correct me if I'm wrong here, but is "you're a racist" a valid response to "your movie sucks"? Because I'm pretty sure it isn't. Now, My Son Hunter has a mostly white cast, which I guess that makes it a racist picture. Maybe the critics would like it better if Morgan Freeman played Joe Biden and Hunter was played by Michael B. Jordan. And Hunter's baby mama could be played by a one-legged pansexual two-spirit transgender Eskimo. There you go. I just turned this picture into a critical darling, probably an Oscar nominee too. You're welcome. Do I think My Son Hunter is a good picture? I don't know if I have an easy answer for that. You can tell it's a movie with a limited budget that has to operate within the constraints that a small budget imposes. The longest scenes in the piece are 2 people talking in the back of a car and 2 people talking in a bedroom. I do think the Gina Carano character works pretty well as a narrative device. Nearly all of her lines are spoken directly to camera, and her main function is to deliver expositional information to the audience. And she does have an extremely sexy voice, too, in my opinion, which doesn't hurt either. Lawrence Fox as Hunter Biden and John James as Joe Biden were a couple of interesting casting choices, I think. They didn't really go for much of a physical or vocal resemblance for either role. It seems like they were more concerned with the dynamic between the 2 actors than they were with having either of them look or sound as much as possible like the person they're portraying, which I think was probably the correct choice, all in all. I can't find much fault with either of the performances, but I do continue to be amazed at how easy it is for a British actor like Lawrence Fox to play an American accent just flawlessly. But when American actors try to play British, it always winds up being a distracting embarrassment. And you will know exactly what I'm talking about if you've ever seen the Robin Hood movie with Kevin Costner. I would have liked this picture better if it had more of a narrative thrust, no pun intended, in the third act. As it is, the point of the screenplay seems to be just to impart as much information from the laptop as possible, and when they're done with that, the movie just kind of ends, which I found a bit of a letdown. Will this picture, is it going to change anybody's mind in any meaningful way? No, it won't. Like Joe said himself, and his character says in the movie, we choose truth over facts, which means one believes whatever one wishes to believe, and facts are either embraced or discarded altogether according to how well they comport with that belief. But it's important, in my view, that this picture and pictures like it do well. The production budget on this thing was something like $2 million, and let's say they spent twice that amount on promotion and distribution, so let's call it $6 million in total. If they can triple that, pull in 18 or 20 million, working completely outside the normal industry channels, I think that would be a fairly tremendous win. It's impossible to say that there isn't a healthy public appetite for works of cinema that are not infected with the woke mind virus. So if this model winds up working, even if the numbers are modest to start out with, then woke Hollywood has a very, very serious problem on its hands. Because other pictures will follow this when the distribution model will be further refined and fine-tuned, and before you know it, 2 or 3 years from now, you might start seeing bigger budget works of non-woke cinema being released and distributed without any involvement from the mainstream film industry and its ideological gatekeepers in the fake news media. And if you are a fan of artists making the art they wish to make, with the woke corporate establishment having no veto power over it, then that can only be an encouraging development. And we will leave it there for tonight. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Have a pleasant tomorrow. See you Wednesday. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.